From the Mercy One studio.
Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And we are broadcasting from the KWKY Iowa Catholic Radio studio here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I am the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Executive Vice President for the Newman Idea. You can check both those out, mchs.edu and newmanidea.com. Bud, out there in Pittsburgh, America, where you do what, good sir?
I'm here directing the National Institute for Newman Studies. Want to help people get to know more about St. John Henry Newman, his life and work, and you can find more at newmanstudies.org.
So, as always, when we start this show, we inevitably end up talking about the weather because we're both. I'm almost officially an old man. I turned 39 maybe it was a week and a half ago now. You are a 40-year-old man, correct, Bud?
I am now.
Yeah, so we kind of have to talk about the weather, or otherwise we're not allowed to talk to anything else. I think that's like the code of old men. Here in Iowa, we've had snow off and on. What's interesting is, so today it's supposed to get into the sort of upper 30s, which for Iowa winters isn't bad. But then at some magical moment later today, the wind is going to start, and it is supposed to plunge to -5 with wind chills of -25. And so, that's going to be a chilly evening. I want to know, are you still continuing the weird Pittsburgh winter where none of this is, like you have a heat shield or something that's blocking the cold Arctic advance of the Canadians towards Pittsburgh?
It has been unusually warm for most of 2020. We did, last week, we had our first official sledding snow. So the kids had like a 36-hour window where they built snow creatures. It was kind of Calvin and Hobbes-ish. They were like attacking our house. But for me, that was nice because I was actually genuinely worried for my kids that they were going to go a whole winter without sledding, which I just think is an atrocity. And shout out to our listeners, especially the homeschooling listeners. Do you know now, Bo, that kids have to do work at home?
Oh, I know.
Public school kids, if they don't get snow days.
I saw that. I don't know if that was like universal or just some district, but the idea that they're now using the internet against kids. I mean, you don't want to point and laugh at people just because you happen to have been a child before any of that, but here's everyone being like, you poor, 30 and 40 somethings, you didn't have internet growing up, har, har, har. And now we're like, oh, now you guys can't ever not go to school. So who had a better childhood now, kids?
That's right. My parents, to combine two topics on the show we like to discuss, my parents like this time of year because Runza, which is a famous fast food joint in Nebraska.
Yes.
It's like pouches of bread filled with meat. They run this special, I think, during February, where the cost of a runza is the temperature for the day.
Do they give you money if it's below zero?
If it's below zero, I forget what the policy is. I mean, I think it's one of those deals where you still have to buy like a French fry or like a soda or something.
Right.
But it's still definitely worth it.
We could have an entire show actually based on what actually is a runza compared to a beer rock, compared to like a kolache. We could have a huge, if we wanted to really get controversial topics, Jimmy, you really want like the listenership to raise up, we could get into big fights about runzas, beer rocks. And now what's funny is some of the people listening to us have no clue what we're talking about. But if you know what we're talking about, you are actually angry at Bud and I for taking sides on this already.
Food brings listeners.
Yeah.
That's right. We're turning into the Food Fight blog radio show.
The Carathon is coming up, right?
Right. So are you trying to attach like donating money to what we'll call our meat pouch pastries? Because I like that idea.
I feel like on weeks like this, we have to keep it pretty serious. But on the Carathon week, it opens up the door for some food conversation. I remember doing push-ups during a Carathon.
Yeah,
so I feel like during the Carathon, it's great to like draw people into our ministry and to call people to like that, to what we're doing at Iowa Catholic Radio. It's also an opportunity to let our hair down a little bit.
If there's a way, and it's just gonna be like, if you give $1,000, you can hear Bo eat 5 runzas. I guess I'll do it. I can do that for the charity but I can do it for the show. Real quick, then, as always, if you eat like a bunch of runzas and end up, hurting your body and you need medical care, don't worry. Mercy College of Health Science, who underwrites this show, is training medical professionals that will help you deal with the deleterious effects of your body as it disintegrates because of all of the calories you intake eating runzas and beer rocks. mchs.edu, you can go there and see the many ways that you can join in the good work of Mercy College. What I want to advertise with the minute we have left at the top of the show, the person that we're going to talk to, Dr. Charles Camosy, he's coming to town, folks. So Mercy College's, we have quarterly, half year, whatever it ends up being, Faith and Healing series. He is going to be here on March 3rd at 6:30, Faith and Healing series at Mercy College of Health Science in the Sullivan Center. mchs.edu to go look at that as well. But Charles Camosy's been on the show. His book, Throwaway Culture, and specifically talking about politics, is even more prescient than it's been when we first talked about it a few months ago. So we're going to talk on the show today with Charles Camosy. Folks, it's going to be a great show, but please remember March 3rd here in Des Moines, Iowa at the Faith and Healings speaker series of Mercy College Health Science. You can see the man live, ask him questions. It's going to be a great show. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. We're back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday, broadcasting from KWKY Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. Thank you for listening. Today on the show, we have an Uncommon Good all-star who's been on the show before, and we're glad to have him back, Dr. Charles Camosy, Associate Professor of Theological and Social Ethics at Fordham University. When he was on last time, we got a chance to sort of preview his book that was just hitting the shelves, Resisting Throwaway Culture, How a Consistent Life Ethic Can Unite a Fractured People. The book has now gone on to really stimulate political and social ethics discussion in this very trying and obviously heated 2020 election. So it's very timely to have him back on the show. Charlie, thanks for coming back and talking with us again.
It's great to be with both of you again. Had a good time last time. Looking forward to this one, too.
One of the things that doesn't always happen when you're someone named Bo Bonner is you do things timely and think ahead and make things really seem to work out. Usually you just kind of stumble through life. But this time it seems like I had a lot of foresight, because not only has Iowa become sort of the epicenter of talking about a lot of the issues, as it were, that are swirling around with the 2020 election. And not only is it the case that you're going to be here in a matter of weeks, March 3rd, not only is that Super Tuesday, so it sort of really seems timely to talk about your book, but literally last night and into this morning, looking on Facebook before coming on the show, you released an article, it was only a few days ago, I believe, regarding Democrats for Life and sort of the difficulties of 2020. And I saw people I know in Des Moines talking about it. So we don't always schedule as perfect as this, and I really have to throw this out.
Well done, sir. Well done.
Yeah, I have to throw this out to Providence more than me. But I guess a really just personal question before we get into the meat of how the book really is speaking to the issues today. Did you see this happening, or is it just sort of, you're an academic and you're like, I'm going to write what's on my heart and I'm going to write this book, and then, whatever happens, or did you go, well, yeah, 2020 is coming up and these are precisely the issues that need to be in book form so we can discuss them?
Well, I guess, I didn't write the book thinking that much. I mean, I knew there was an election coming up, and that kind of was in the back of my mind when I was writing the book. But had a version of that book. I wanted to write a book on a consistent life ethic for as many people as talk about the CLE and criticize it and laud it. There isn't really that much out there on it, and so I wanted to write a book on it, especially in light of Pope Francis and his becoming Pope. And things just happened to work out. Notre Dame wanted to do an online course with me on the consistent life ethic, and that kind of got me in motion to finish writing this book, which took much more time than it typically does for me to write a book. But anyway, that's all to say. It's just providential as well that this comes around at this time. It's also providential that the news, I'm not exactly sure why it's news that I left the Democratic, Democrats for Life anyway, because millions of people, frankly, who lean Democrat have left the party because of their extremism. I actually left Democrats for Life last summer without any fanfare at all, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, it exploded over the last 2 weeks, I think in part because Democrats finally started making it clear that they have absolutely no intention of even suggesting anything other than abortion being a social good with no restrictions at all, paid for by pro-lifers' tax dollars. So yeah, I guess there's just been a confluence of events that have happened all at the same time, and hopefully some good can come out of it.
No, not to go too far afield on that point too, but because of the internet, we think of the immediacy of information, but there's also a way in which zombie information gets to come back and haunt us. I think all of us have had the experience of like looking on Facebook and going, "Oh my goodness, this celebrity that I've always loved is dead," and everyone's like, "That was 4 years ago." So that happens. But no, you're right. So this is something that, this break is something you've talked about for a while, but it really does seem the sort of cultural confluence of people wanting to talk about it is, I can tell you that article really is hitting a nerve, and I was doing my best to be a good friend and go like, you need to listen to the radio show and then come to his talk and then buy the book. I'll send the invoice later. But the idea, of course, is, sometimes it just takes events to come together for people to reconsider what people have been talking about for a while. And I guess just to make this point to our listeners in a sort of political way, it can seem futile to keep bringing up the truth. But sometimes the truth is just waiting, so to speak, for a better door to open. And is that maybe a fair thing to say? Is it looks like doors are opening for discussions in this current sort of feeling of the people because of this presidential election?
I think that's right, and I think it's another example actually because the 2016 Democratic platform was the one, in fact, where Elise Hogue and others, from NARAL and all Planned Parenthood and others wrote in the platform language that there should be absolutely no restrictions on abortion. It should be paid for by pro-life tax dollars, no conscience protections, etc. So this is old news for those of us that at least pay attention to this. But now, I think especially spurred by Kristen Bay's question of Pete Buttigieg at a Fox News town hall, which kind of made a lot of people on the right, especially who for their own reasons wanted to pump it up, say, whoa, wait a minute, what's the deal now? What position do they have? No restrictions? A position that, 13% of the United States holds, they're all in on and willing to die for, don't seem to be willing to compromise at all. Amy Klobuchar, I think, is the only person who's even said pro-lifers are welcome while not changing her all-in position on abortion. So, again, it's that for anybody who wanted to find it, that position has been around for 4 years, or a little less than 4 years. But now it's in breaking, and that's caused a lot of people to say, "Whoa, how could this possibly be?" Even pro-choice friends of mine, when I tell them this, really don't believe it. I have to send them the actual chapter and verse for them to be convinced.
Charlie, sticking with that for a moment, I've been kind of mystified at. So when you think about electoral politics, often you get this idea that politicians are the most pragmatic of individuals because the goal is to get elected. And I just wonder, I know this is sort of a little bit outside the orbit of your book, but why do you think the Democratic Party or the establishment there has become so staunchly pro-choice, even beyond what the populist where the populace is. I guess what I'm asking is, when you were, really involved in the party, was there any discussion about like this is hurting our cause just in terms of getting elected?
We would try. We would definitely try. I mean, it was in our interest to try, obviously, but we would try. We'd say, hey, listen, so-and-so pro-life Democrat could actually beat the Republican in this seat. Could we get them some money? Could we get them some support? No. And the ostensible conclusion from that is they'd rather have a Republican in the seat than a pro-life Democrat. Other things we would try, like try to get support for increasing choice for women, reproductive choice for women, like perinatal hospice, for instance, getting women resources, getting that better funded. When there is a difficult pregnancy with a difficult diagnosis, giving them the more choice, giving them an additional choice to choose perinatal hospice would seem like something that pro-choice individuals would be in, but the so-called stigma that comes with that, this idea that other women made a different choice, even talking about perinatal hospice increases the stigma of those who've had abortions, and we don't want to do anything like that. So I don't know. I mean, I've thought a lot about this question. I don't have a good answer. My only kind of speculative response is, I think in the era of Twitter and social media, a very small number of people can make life absolutely miserable for politicians and others.
Right.
And can literally get them, I mean, it's an overused word now, but canceled. And they can enforce orthodoxy this way. And for some reason, this particular orthodoxy is just strictly enforced with a kind of energy and passion that, again, is unmatched. I mean, pro-lifers often get criticized for being single issue. This is another example of single issue politics that I've ever seen one.
Well, Charlie, what's funny about all this, right, is so how I got familiar with your work, I tipped my hat over to Bud there. We're going to teach a bioethics classes a few years ago, and he goes, I actually think the best book to talk about, to lay this out to students who aren't necessarily pro-life where we're coming from. We're going to be talking to students, and they're probably from a wider range of positions. And what's a good book to get them to start having the conversation about the Catholic understanding of all this? And so you're Beyond the Abortion Wars. And I read the book, and I'm like, man, this is eminently fair to the other side in a way that you even largely don't see in pro-life material. And again, I'm not like necessarily criticizing that, because a lot of time they're forcefully trying to like push the point about how dire the situation is. But your book is, okay, right, let's actually have a dialogue, right? And you cannot believe the resistance we got from colleagues simply because what you were stating is, let's actually try to find common ground to talk about this very difficult issue. The fact of the book, to your point, in their mind was somehow an affront. And when I talk with people in Europe, Britain evidently is much further down this road where, basically to even bring up pro-life issues at all is to basically act like you want to bring up child sacrifice or something like this, which is just something absolutely taboo. The only place in Europe that I see any sort of like hope for this at all is the pro-life movement in France. But in France currently, anytime you have any political problem, you like go burn trash cans and have a riot. So you would always hope we could find a middle position here in the United States. But I don't know if you had to choose between Britain or France, I would hope that we could at least, like you said, be able to act like this is an argument to be had rather than just a societal taboo.
What's interesting about Europe, though, and you've probably seen me bring this up on social media because I do it a lot, is, this is one of the first moves I make in a dialogue with somebody who is my at least perceived opponent on the issue is, could we at least get to a policy like the Netherlands on abortion? Most of Europe has restrictions on abortion towards the end of the first trimester.
Right.
So, or early second trimester. So, we could talk about the pro-life movement there, but that kind of policy proposed today is wild right-wing extremism, religious people imposing their views on women whose autonomy, But liberal Europe, progressive Europe, secular Europe has these restrictions that have absolutely no chance of passing in the United States. And, that's an eye-opener again for a lot of people don't believe it. They make me... with reason, given what our culture tells them, send them the link so they can see. But it's just a reality, and that's something I think we need to talk about more often. Where can we get in common ground? One last point on this: the Gallup poll asks, I think, every 2 years about trimesters and people's views on abortion. And consistently, year in, year out, or 2 years in, 2 years out, I guess, they find that 6 in 10 people want abortion broadly legal before week 12. We got to work on that. But after week 12, 7 in 10 want it broadly illegal. 7 in 10 U.S. Americans of all stripes, pro-life, pro-choice, and everything in between, want it broadly illegal after week 12. And then after week 24 to the third trimester, it falls off a cliff. It's only, I mentioned before, 13% want it legal in the third trimester. So there's really a lot of, I mean, on paper anyway, just a ton of hope for common ground. There's even more common ground when it comes to supporting women in difficult situations with perinatal hospice, paid leave, help with child care, et cetera. But like I mentioned before, a small group of people can keep the conversations from happening.
You made a comment earlier in the interview that sort of hinted at the fact that the consistent life ethic, it's not uncontroversial. And what I mean by that is I've met Catholics who are not like gung-ho about it. And I know even at the recent meeting of the American Bishops' Conference, there was some discussion about what language should be used about abortion in like voting guides and things. Do you think it's helpful or constructive to say like this has a kind of priority that other ethical issues have? Or are you concerned that maybe kind of lets us off the hook when it comes to other issues that we should be seriously concerned about?
I guess I'm of two minds on this question. I'd be interested to know what either of you think about it, since you have different constituencies, different people you talk to. But my strong sense is, and maybe it's just where I live and where I work, is the foundational problem for the pro-life movement is we get criticized, sometimes unfairly, most often unfairly, for being single issue. And this is somehow just like actually misogyny in disguise, or an attempt to, win political advantages for other reasons. And that there's some evidence to point to that, like members of the pro-life caucus actually telling their mistresses to have abortion and things like that who are Republicans. But,
right.
But in general, I think that's the biggest hurdle for having dialogue with people who disagree with us, is to clear the conceptual space with regard to that objection. And then a dialogue can actually happen. But maybe that's just my experience. On the other hand, why I have two minds of this, I don't think abortion is, just the raw, empirical facts of abortion, the hundreds of thousands of the most vulnerable among us killed in horrific ways, and women being put in positions they don't want to be put in desperate situations they don't want to be put in. Hundreds of thousands of them as well, every year, annually. What other issue could approach that, actually, in terms of the moral gravity and urgency? So, I wrote a book on the consistent life ethic, showing the connections and making a case that, in fact, we don't need to choose between these issues, and our witness on multiple issues actually makes our abortion witness stronger. But anyway, that lays out some confusing detail maybe about why I'm of two minds.
Well, but okay, so two minds is an interesting way to put this, because it seems like that is actually the goal of, to borrow a term that I think most people would associate with the quote other side of maybe the abortion issue, where feminist causes or things like this, but it's clearly a good example of what everybody calls gaslighting. So when people who have the leverage, and especially if they're a small amount of people, have the leverage to make people continually question like how they sort of butt up against reality, that, there's all sorts of other things. But I think that's the essential idea of the term, is it makes you want to bifurcate your mind and you become your own critic. Like, am what I'm seeing actually not what I'm seeing? Is there something wrong with me? The two critical issues that I see this, there's multiple, but just two that come to mind. So obviously abortion is one where, if they can make the conversation be like, oh, well, you're too concerned about what is murder, you start to go, well, then maybe I need to doubt everything else that I think of. We do this with sex trafficking, I think, too, and pornography, is they've made us go like, oh, yeah, well, that's empowering. And you're like, really? Like, this thing that seems to be the exact opposite of what you're saying, but if you say it enough in a sort of mantra, maybe I'll question myself. I think we say this with, just to throw gasoline on this whole fire, this is with immigration, this is with the poor, all of these things that as Christians we know we're supposed to care about these people. There is a small minority, they utilize things like social media for sure to make us question what seems like reality and make us ask, is it actually the actual opposite of what I see? And that psychological warfare, to make a bold term, is I think what is exactly your book is trying to fight. Because if we talk about the consistent life ethic, it's not about, I actually don't think it's a matter of like weighing like what's more or less important. It's actually sort of an attack against this gaslighting that makes you doubt the very thing that seems so obvious. And I wonder if you've seen that sort of in your conversations about trying to have this conversation about the consistent life ethic.
Yeah, no, you articulated that very well, and I don't know that I've thought about it like that until just now, but I think that's right. Too often I'm in my own head trying to think not only about what I believe about these things, but about trying to be wise as serpents and peaceful as doves at the same time, and that's tough, right? That's difficult, but it's got to be done. Our own the I was going to use a word I probably can't use on radio, but the difficult discourse we have at the moment calls out for more people to really think about not just spouting what they happen to think very strongly in their hearts, but doing so in a way that's wise as serpents and peaceful as doves.
No, and if there's anything that I hope our show contributes to, discourse-wise, to use the word again, is exactly giving people the ammunition to do that, to live out that verse well. This is The Uncommon Good. Charlie, we'll be back right after the break, so please stick with us. It's been a great conversation so far. Bo Bonner, Bud Marr, The Uncommon Good, coming from KWKY Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you from KWKY Iowa Catholic Radio Studios this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show. We have online with us again Dr. Charles Camosy, Associate Professor of Theological and Social Ethics at Fordham University. His book, Resisting Throwaway Culture, How a Consistent Life Ethic Can Unite a Fractured People, is a book you definitely need to make sure to get on your bookshelves. He is coming to Des Moines here in March 3rd, Super Tuesday. He will be our Faith and Healing speaker at Mercy College of Health Sciences. That starts at 6:30. You can go to not iowacatholicradio.com. You should go there anyway, too, but you can go to mchs.edu to find out more. Charlie, thanks for joining us again on the show.
Really enjoying the conversation.
I just want you to because I know you maybe heard over the break the weather report. It will be negative 20 tomorrow, but probably not when you're here. But I can't make promises. But we're hoping for not negative 20 the night that you're supposed to talk.
It was quite shocking. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I'm somewhat aware of what that weather used to be like. But even in New Jersey, it's nothing like that. At least this winter.
Well, yeah, we're not doing our part making the sort of the heat reflections like some of the New Jersey towns. No, I'm kidding. So when we ended with the break, one of the things we were talking about is when it comes to trying to understand what I'm supposed to do as a Catholic with the consistent life ethic that I have. And in the book, I think you do a good job of pointing out that even a statement that should be banal, to say consistent life ethic, should just mean like, yeah, we're trying to talk about life and all the ways that it shows up everywhere. But even a word like that can start to be shaded and coded one direction or the other, politics-wise. I'm currently having a group of students read Joseph Pieper's wonderful little book, Abuse of Language, Abuse of Power, where he brings up precisely the fact that what the sophists did, that group that fought with Socrates so long ago, is they figured out how to weaponize words instead of use them for their purpose, which is actually to be in communion with other people. I wonder if you find that to be one of the most difficult aspects of being an ethicist, a teacher, and someone very concerned about Catholics in their relation to politics is the weaponizations of words and the sort of inversion of the purpose of language to serve other goals than to create sort of human community.
Boy, am I nervous about that. And it connects to the online culture that I mentioned before, where words can be skewed and turned and twisted in ways like we never have really seen before, and as quickly, as you can't possibly imagine how quickly, and it's scary, frankly, how that can happen, especially when you're dealing with issues that people care so passionately about on multiple sides. But with the consistent life ethic, or even the seamless garment, I think is even more invoked, almost like sarcastically, like, oh, that Camosy guy, he's a seamless garment guy, almost with dripping derision coming right from the phrase itself. And I think we might have talked about this last time, but it doesn't come from nowhere. There's a deep concern I have about folks who want to take Bernardine, who want to take St. John Paul II and Evangelium Vitae and turn it into something it's not, and to say that, oh, it's just the collapse of all issues, but that, again, that doesn't come from nowhere. There are people, mostly on the left, who say, oh, this is a reason not to care about abortion as much, or not to care about euthanasia as much. And that's a real thing, and that's something that ought to be resisted. If there's one, and Bernardine would have totally resisted that with everything he had. He was all in resisting abortion. Roe versus Wade happened when he was, in his prime and coming up as a bishop and cardinal. So we can start there, but then, painting with that broad brush is just not intellectually honest. One reason I wanted to write the book, frankly, is so that I could just point to a book I wrote where people said that of me, and I could say, you obviously haven't read my book, please go read it, because that's not what I think at all. And I cite Bernardine not thinking that at all. So it's just a helpful resource in that regard. But I don't know, like, maybe this isn't the right time to be talking about something like this, but a major theme of my book is to say, how, and I'm indicting myself here, how active should we actually be as believers in these kind of rough and tumble debates where people turn these words against each other? And how much more time should we be spending in thoughtful reflection and quiet and prayer, thinking about these things ourselves and allowing God to work on us and lead us in the direction that God is wanting to lead us in? I think the noise, I think the energy, the froth, the antagonism, the vitriol of that rough and tumble can lead us astray and can tempt us to play those games ourselves, with those word games ourselves, and using the language in ways that it's not for. So one big theme of the book actually is maybe for some of us we need to take a break from all that and make more time to be quiet. I know Iowa maybe is coming down from whatever happened last week and trying to think about that themselves. Maybe it goes beyond Iowa, though. Maybe we need to think as a country about taking a deep breath and kind of rediscovering those fundamental places in ourselves where God speaks to us and pushes us in the directions that He wants us to go in.
This is another issue that you've worked on is polarization. And in this book that you helped edit on polarization in the Catholic Church, the editors described it as one of the gravest illnesses affecting our church today. And I guess stepping back from the nitty-gritty of just like specific political issues, do you have any thoughts on sort of like a theological understanding of how do we live in a church where inevitably there are people in the pews that we're rubbing shoulders with that we disagree with strongly? And I mean, there's been a lot of studies of this kind of development in the U.S., and I saw something recently where, like, today Americans would rather like their child marry someone from a different religion and from a different political party. And I guess in a church where communion and unity is so essential, how do we begin to think about maybe transcending, or at least coming to terms with some of the strong divides that we find in our midst?
Yeah, well, I would respond to that first by just reiterating what I just said, that that the more we can become quiet and be in the presence of God before the Blessed Sacrament and go to confession and be in those places that God speaks to us and moves in us, the more I think we become aware of how our brotherhood and sisterhood in Christ is so much more fundamental to who we are than, whether we hate this party or loathe that party or kind of support that party. Especially at this time of political realignment, it's just not even clear what it means now to support these parties, except on abortion. Maybe that might be the one issue.
Right.
But there's so much ferment and change and shifting around, and who knows what Donald Trump even is. It's just not clear at all what these things even mean. And the Democratic Party looks like it might have a civil war on its hands if Bloomberg actually gets serious play. That it won't even be clear what it means to be a Democrat at that point. So I don't know. Can we get to that point where, if we're rubbing shoulders with a person who has a political disagreement with us, that we say, well, that's almost like disagreeing about what sports teams we support, or what kind of what we like to put on our pizza, which I know matters to a lot of people, including me, but it's not the most important thing. And instead focus on what unites us, which is our common baptism as brothers and sisters of Christ, in Christ. Maybe that's naive. I don't think it is, though. I think one big problem is that we don't rub shoulders enough with people who disagree with us. We use, in some ways, our membership in particular kinds of parishes, which then almost are like stores that serve customers based on their particular kind of theological and political viewpoints, and maybe it's better to call it theopolitical viewpoints because it becomes so connected and merged. It would be better if we just had. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, I was just to ask a much more concrete question. Are you of the opinion that it'd be good to have a third party emerge? I think it was an article that you wrote that I saw the term duopoly used, and I guess it just feels to me like at this point elections are approached as zero-sum games, and so any quarter to the other side is just a massive loss for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's what I decided to do when I left Democrats for Life. Was I joined a little but growing party called the American Solidarity Party, which I think is not perfect. No party is, but much, much, much better reflects Catholic teaching than any of the major options available to us now. And I think that's part of what I discovered about myself when I at least tried to take my own advice and was quiet and said, the froth and angst and difficulty and vitriol and high-stress situation of doing what I was doing wasn't working either for me personally and certainly not for the Democratic Party and the people that I wanted protected and supported. Nothing was happening, in fact. So I felt God calling me to play a longer game, not the game of the next, legislative session or election cycle. But, especially in light of this time of realignment, people are looking around for new things and new options. And I would just humbly suggest, if any of this is making sense to any of your listeners, at least check out the website of the American Solidarity Party and see if that's something you might consider. Because, frankly, the church is famous for thinking in terms of centuries and longer term, and I'm not necessarily thinking about centuries here, but we have to get, in my opinion, we have to get out of this rut of thinking about the next legislative or election cycle. It's just not at all helpful.
I'm going to embarrass Bud here, but I don't care because it's funny. There's been people who have suggested that Bud run for office in the American Solidarity Party. And the bigger deal I want to point out is they never ask me, which shows that they think Bud's better looking. So that's fair. I think
you guys should be the next ticket, 2024.
Do you want us to be in trouble with our wives? Is this what you're getting at?
That may be a foreseen but unintended consequence.
The double effect.
The law of double effect. Yep.
So the other thing too I want to point out is you were pointing out, and I think you're right, that sometimes what we need is just to be silent and think about these things. But I think if Iowans are being silent, they're contemplating that they're going to have to do a new bent on tourism because they're about to not be the first caucus anymore. So maybe they just need a drink and a nap, and then they can have silent time. In addition to all the great things you're pointing out, I think something else that if we're going to talk about being good with words, and I forget who I'm plagiarizing here, I've heard it so much that in many ways, if theology teaches us anything, it should be that like being careful with words as people who believe that the Word became flesh is an actual obligation to us to be careful with words. And so I sometimes think people need to go also back to the roots of everything and be as simple as possible. When we talk about being pro-life, obviously that word has been politicized, weaponized, put on spectrums, stretched, broken, cracked. We mean all sorts of stuff by it. But if we're going to ask what we mean when we say life ethic, how does that fit into Catholic social teaching and the common good? And I've tried to point out to people, right, that life is the one good that must be held in common if we're going to hold any other goods in common. And I think sometimes that's lost, right? We don't stop to point this out to people. Yes, abortion is the big threat to it, right? Because it's legal, it's horrific what's being done. But undergirding all of it, and this is why, it starts to hit, like you've said in your book, so many other things, is we have to get back to that basic philosophical point. If the point of the human communion is to share the best goods together, including supernatural goods like the faith and the church, that can't happen unless we share life together. And so it's important to get people back into that headspace. Life is the fundamental good. In order to share any other goods in common, we must share that one. And therefore, we must set up policies in a world that protects and gives the benefit of the doubt to life. And, you do such good work, Charlie, in pointing this out. I wonder do you see that, like, in Catholics themselves, that point, because we get lost in the weeds, like you say, that essential point is sometimes goes unsaid or gets forgotten?
Yeah, it does. But, and it tends to come from small government-y or libertarian-y Republican pro-lifers, but, they don't respond to the critique that, you guys don't care about the poor, you don't care about children after they're born. Not with saying, that's not important, we only need to be talking about abortion. No, they say, what are you talking about? We support those individuals in many, 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 many ways. We just have a philosophical or political disagreement over how best to do that. But if we can, and I'm not on that side of the political spectrum, but I mean, that's a place to start, isn't it? To say, to totally affirm what you just said, that sharing life in common is at a, if you want to use the principle of subsidiarity, at the lowest level possible, at the level closest to the people, to the individual communities that need it the most possible, then, we're all on board with that. There's no disagreement about that. That's what we're all in for. It's just now we're having hopefully a good faith debate about how best to accomplish that politically. But that's why I'm beating the hammer on this, I guess, or whatever. I think it's important to really be quiet and to pray and to let God influence us in these ways, rather than continuing the old stale arguments that were kind of old and stale when my parents were my age. It's in some ways we're using the categories and versions of the same arguments that my grandparents were using, and we're just in a different time. Hopefully this comes through in the book. I think we're in a hopeful time. This ferment, this realignment is something that I think Christians especially can take advantage of. It's a chance to kind of recognize our idolatry and move in different directions that God is calling us to.
Well, so to use the '80s metaphor, since you brought up, like using stuff, it's all like people are like, man, we're really tired of all this, new wave stuff. Let's like do something new, and then everybody turns on Billy Squier, The Stroke, and acts like, oh yeah, we're really doing something. You're like, that's 1981. We've all heard that before, and it's and I've just lost like every single listener under 35. They're like, Bo's new cool show, and now he's talking about Billy Squier. Sorry. The point being, though,
Google it.
Google Billy Squier. It's worth it. The point being. There's a way in which the adage "there's nothing new under the sun" is absolutely true. We really are having arguments as old as time, but there's also a way in which the forms, the sort of rhetorical forms. I mean, it's like language itself. One more time, language obviously changes. Like and if we're going to try to sort of surpass difficulties in English, let's say that's something we care about, while going back to the sources like Latin and Anglo-Saxon, all these things could help. It's not like we'll ever be able to like return to the fly in the amber, the mosquito in the amber. We're going to have to talk about learning from our past and figuring out how to go forward. And it just seems to me that one of the things that people act like we're the most cutting edge on is politics. And all you have to do, you don't even have to do ancient history. Just listen to history like right around the time Reagan is running against Carter, and it gets really depressing about how similar all this still sounds. And
it's unbelievable.
And I think what I want to say, we're getting ready to have to let you go here. People really need to come hear your talk live. I know that you go like, oh, well, didn't you talk about it on the radio show? No, we really only skimmed the surface of what you go to in depth. And like I said, one more time, March 3rd, Super Tuesday, you'll be here in Des Moines at Mercy College of Health Science for the Faith and Healing Speaker Series that starts at 6:30. And we're really looking forward to having you come and talk about these pivotal issues at a pivotal time.
Well, I'll bring my jacket, but I'm also really looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, we'll pray for better weather. Charlie, thank you for coming on again. And like I said, not only we're happy to have you on the show, can't wait to have you here in town. Dr. Camosy, Associate Professor of Theological and Social Ethics at Fordham University. You can get his book. In fact, I say you must get his book, Resisting Throwaway Culture, How a Consistent Life Ethic Can Unite a Fractured People. Dr. Camosy, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bud. Hope to talk again soon.
Thanks.
Folks, this is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our family, our city, our state, our nation, the world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good. Blessings, stay warm, and we'll see you next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.